This message is brought to you by Apple Card. Get 3% daily cash back when you buy an iPhone with your Apple Card at Apple. Subject to credit approval. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Terms and more at applecard.com. Slate Money is brought to you by Charles Schwab. Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise.
Hello, and welcome to Money Talks. I'm your host, Elizabeth Spires, and today I'm joined by Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist Gary Rivlin, who has a book out. It's called AI Valley, Microsoft, Google, and the trillion-dollar race to cash in on artificial intelligence. So Gary, introduce yourself and tell us about the book.
Great to be here. I just had crazy timing. Right at the end of 2022, I had this idea like, hey, I'm hearing AI starting to get hot. So just before ChatGPT, before the whole world was talking about ChatGPT, I started contacting people in Silicon Valley, looking for those trying to get rich, the mad dash to cash in on AI. So that was my angle from the start. Let others kind of talk about the bigger issues. What does it mean that we're talking to a machine, whatever. I just love the stakes. They don't even really use the word billion anymore. It's now the trillion-dollar raise, because that really is the stakes here. It's many trillions of dollars. Funny enough, I was paying attention at first to startups. And I thought like, hey, who's going to be the next Google? Who's going to be the next Facebook Meta? And it turns out, this is rather depressing to me, I think the next Google is going to be Google and the next Meta Facebook is going to be Meta Facebook. But we could get into that.
I mean, that makes sense because they're all, investing heavily and doing acquisitions, in some cases, incredibly high dollar acqui-hires in order to, I think, vacuum up all of the AI talent in the Valley.
Yeah, I mean, the acqui-hire, for those who don't know, is like it's buying a company largely just for the talent. And there have been like multi-billion-dollar acqui-hires. So spending multiple billions of dollars just to get the 2 or 3 top AI researchers you want. But, across the board, this is so expensive. It's like it costs hundreds of millions, nowadays billions, to train and operate these models. And it's really hard for a startup to get access to that kind of money. You need data. I mean, Google has all this search data. How is 2 people in a dorm room going to have access to the data that you need for training and stuff? And of course, these days, there was a news story a couple of weeks ago in the New York Times, that Facebook was offered someone or gave someone a $250 million
I saw that. Yeah, that's
contract.
That's
That's like the highest paid baseball players kind of contract. So, it's hard for a startup to compete in that realm.
It's funny because a lot of people view technology as something that's fundamentally lower barrier to entry because software is scalable in a way that other businesses aren't. But with AI, it's very different. When AI people talk about compute, they're talking about a limited resource and the amount of investment you need to actually do this. So just to go back to your book is primarily about Reid Hoffman's AI ventures. And his primary company that he invested in is not a household name. It's called Inflection AI. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened there?
It was an email from Reid Hoffman in 2022 that gave rise to this book. And he's the founder of LinkedIn and co-founder of LinkedIn. And he said, I'm co-founding my first company. It was like, dear friends. It turns out I'm one of his 2,500 friends. But
so am I.
But it was like, hey, I've co-founded my first startup since LinkedIn. And I had programmed earlier in my life. And I just love this idea he laid out. Instead of us having to invent machine languages, instead of having to learn the computer's language, the computer's going to speak our languages. And that just kind of is speaking human. I just loved that idea. And so Hoffman, he was one of the initial investors in OpenAI, which gave us ChatGPT. He's on the board of Microsoft. They've been a central player in AI. But I love the idea that he was coming up with this startup that wasn't paying attention just to IQ, but EQ, emotional intelligence. And, they really kind of staked that out. And, I played with it. It was rather extraordinary. And I kind of think that's underrated these days and how important it is to winning the AI chatbot wars. Like, one of the more popular ones is Claude from Anthropic, and that's because it's kind of fun to talk to. It's playful,
Yeah.
and so I spent time with the other co-founders, engineers, those working on this, trying to like get it just right. It was, it's sort of whack-a-mole. You want it too friendly, and then it's glazing you, it's complimenting you, it's just kind of insipid. But then if you kind of turn that down, so it was kind of really fun to. It loved emojis at first. They had like, okay, chill, folks. It's Pi. It was called PI. Is the name of their chatbot.
How much of that do you think is really just a function of the founder ethos? Like, I know Reed a little bit, and he's teddy bearish, but will also be formidable when the situation calls for it. But he has, I think, higher EQ than most billionaires. How much of that was really sort of built into a sort of philosophical thing from the beginning?
I like that description of Hoffman. I call him a billionaire you can almost root for. But inflection came more from partner, the co-founder, the main impetus for the company, the CEO, this guy, Mustafa Suleyman. Mustafa Suleyman is kind of royalty within the machine learning, within the AI world, because he was a co-founder of DeepMind, the first great machine learning company. It goes back to 2010 and founded in London. Google bought it for like $650 million in 2014. And, I'll give them credit, Hoffman, Suleyman, the whole team. They really cared about personality. They really cared about safety. They really wanted a certain bot that had a certain sensibility that you could go to it and query and have a serious conversation about politics or life, or I'm scared of this. And, as opposed to, if people use ChatGPT, they're changing. They're starting to really amp up the EQ, especially with 4 and 5, where it was a conversation. You go to ChatGPT and it's like, what should I do in this situation? And here's 5 things to consider. They just give you bullet points. But with Pi, it was kind of fun. You'd have this dialogue and, hey, how you doing? And, you kind of chit chat and it would compliment you on your stupid jokes. Again, it really was too much of a people pleaser. Yeah, sycophantic.
That's been a recurring criticism of some of the AI bots, especially whenever they lean into that. It ends up people get very attached to their bots and do insane things.
Actually, OpenAI, when they put out GPT-5, they just said, this is what you're going to use. You're not going to use the past methods.
Yes.
And, many people, including me, were very pleased because if you don't pay for it, you were using an old version. And here I was getting the cutting edge, best version of it. But a lot of people were really disappointed because they had developed a relationship with GPT 4.0 or 4.0. And so they got a lot of heat for it. Like, wait, you just overnight just kind of remove this relationship I have. I think the future is going to be very, very interesting, very, very weird, because 10 years from now, there are going to be people who have very deep, I call it romantic relationships. It's already started to happen, but I think it's going to be far more commonplace.
There was a tabloid story yesterday about a woman who got engaged to her AI boyfriend. So
mazel tov.
I guess it's already happening. And GPT-5 has not gotten a great reception. And I think partly because of what you were talking about, but also because Altman kept talking about it like it was the arrival of general intelligence, AGI. And then what people actually got was what seems to be a more incremental model. What have you played with it? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and kind of the bigger point here is overhype is really hurting the cause of those advancing AI. I use AI all the time, all day for work. A research assistant to bounce ideas off of. It's a pretty good editor. I use them all. I feel it's kind of my job. So, Claude happens to be my favorite for writing and editing. But yeah, I've been using ChatGPT because of the upgrade. I think it's a miracle. I think it's alchemy. I can't believe I could work with this thing and it writes so fast. And it's an amazing tool. But the problem with the rhetoric coming out of Silicon Valley is as if it's this Uber thing that's going to run our lives and make all the decisions. Like, no, it's a tool. A calculator is a tool. A camera is a tool. It's amazing. It lets you do amazing, amazing things, but it's a co-pilot. We could get into the whole artificial general intelligence debate, but there was such a drum roll. Altman was promoting it on X and other social media, and it was inevitable disappointment. As opposed to ChatGPT, when it came out November 30th, 2022, I think it was the greatest flex in the history of technology. They didn't call a press conference. They didn't put out a press release. There was no press event. They just posted it with a research note, and a few people put it on X, and it kind of took some time, took a few weeks before it became a big deal, before people, a lot of people started using it. Now, of course, it's the Steve Jobsian like events where the great oracle, in this case Sam Altman, comes on stage, and and it's just like, yeah, no, I would just go back to what you had. Just let people discover it, let people tell you it's amazing. Don't tell us it's amazing, because we're going to be disappointed, because it's not artificial general intelligence. It's a slight improvement for most of us on the previous version.
What I find sort of surprising is that we use AI every day. It's built into most of the big software that we use, and it's been around for decades. I remember reading Marvin Minsky's book, in 2007, and I think the real inflection point was it was ChatGPT being released because it was positioned as a consumer product. And I think it was probably the first one that people really played with, and they were astonished by it. Why didn't the other bots break through like that?
It's a great question. But to back up a bit, like, the great surprise for me when I started doing research on this is, like, AI has been around since the 1950s. The term artificial intelligence was coined in the mid 1950s, and there's been all sorts of advances, key points, kind of in the early 2010s. They realized, like, wait, we shouldn't, like, code every possible alternative. That's not the way to create artificial intelligence. Let's have machine learning. It's akin to the way a human learns. We'll feed it data, books, articles, kind of Reddit posts, whatever, and it'll learn like humans do with feedback. Like, yeah, that's not a great answer. It will learn over time. So that was a great breakthrough. But, if I worked at Google in the late 2010s or early 2020s, I would have been going out of my mind. In fact, Mustafa Suleyman was, and in fact, banging on the table like, this is amazing what we have. They had ChatGPT as early as 2020. It wasn't called that, but they had a bot that could do exactly what we all discovered when we started playing with ChatGPT could do. But Google's a big company. Google brings in tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, and they were worried. The PR arm, the marketing arm, was worried. What will it mean? What happens if it starts misbehaving? Because there had been examples in 2016. Microsoft put out Tay. It was one of these chatbots trained, not a very good idea in retrospect, on social media. And within 24 hours, they had to pull it down because it was, a Nazi saluting white supremacist and, saying anti-Semitic stuff. And so they had to pull it and say, kind of the specter of Tay just kind of hung over Microsoft, Google, every big company. So in retrospect, it was inevitable that it was going to be a startup like OpenAI that put this thing out because they didn't have as much to lose. And you put your finger on it, like Google Translate's been around since the mid 2010s. That's AI. The suggestions we get from Netflix, you might like this movie based on your previous watching habits. That's AI. But that's in the background. What is astonishing about ChatGPT and the other large language models, the chatbots, is you could talk to it, you see it working, you hear it working.
Okay, we're going to stop right there and take a quick break for an ad, and then we'll be back with Gary Rivlin.
Slate Money is brought to you by Charles Schwab. Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news in Washington right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes, and trade, inflation concerns, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise or wherever you listen.
Slate Money is sponsored this week by Saks. Saks Fifth Avenue makes it easy to shop for your personal style this season. Fall is here, and there are so many new fall arrivals that you're going to want to wear again and again. There's a great new relaxed Prada blazer. There are Gucci loafers you can take from work to the weekend. It is incredibly easy to visit Saks.com and find new arrivals from your favorite designers. I kind of love the shirts from Comme des Garçons. I can't always afford them, but it is definitely always there on my inspo board. And once in a blue moon, I might even buy one. Saks makes shopping feel customized to you. They have in-store stylists. They have Saks.com showing you only what you like to shop. They will even let you know when arrivals from your favorite designers are in or when something you love is back in stock. So find inspiration for your personal style every day at Saks Fifth Avenue.
This message is brought to you by Apple Card. Each Apple product, like the iPhone, is thoughtfully designed by skilled designers. The titanium Apple Card is no different. It's laser etched, has no numbers, and it earns you daily cash on everything you buy, including 3% back on everything at Apple. Apply for Apple Card on your iPhone in minutes. Subject to credit approval. Apple Card is issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Terms and more at applecard.com.
If you thought goldenly breaded McDonald's chicken couldn't get more golden, think Golder, because new sweet and smoky special edition gold sauce is here. Made for your chicken favorites at participating McDonald's for a limited time.
Hey, business owners, we know you know the importance of maximizing every dollar. With the Delta SkyMiles Reserve Business American Express card, you can make your expenses work just as hard as you. From afternoon coffee runs to stocking office supplies and even team dinners, you can earn miles on all your business expenses. Plus, you can earn 125,000 bonus miles for a limited time through October 29th. The Delta SkyMiles Reserve Business Card. If you travel, you know. Minimum spending requirements and terms apply. Offer ends October 29th, 2025.
When you started this book, I think you were thinking about writing or started to write a book about Marc Andreessen, and you decided to do this instead. So I'm curious about how you contrast Andreessen's version of techno-optimism with, say, Reed's, or do you think that there's a material difference between them?
It's funny. So I was thinking in the fall of 2022, and I was unfortunately right. Like, wait, kind of the base, the center of a lot of the right-wing stuff was Silicon Valley. And Andreessen had a big platform, Peter Thiel. And these were folks, so I've been covering tech since the mid-1990s. I read for Wired, New York Times. I was covering these folks. And, they would all talk to me. In fact, it's all my fault. I did the first big profile of Peter Thiel. I put him in the New York Times Magazine in 2004, 2005. It's funny. I always found him such an interesting guy. Obviously, we have very different politics, but it was something like, he's principled. And I kind of feel like all of that's gone out the window.
Well, Nick Denton found him interesting too. And that's how this whole thing started.
Yeah, I'm not the only one, apparently. But getting to your question, it's like Hoffman has a really interesting construction. There's the doomers, and those, I feel like they're kind of watch too many Hollywood movies. They're just fearing like laser-eyed robots subjugating humanity. Like, we have a lot to worry about in AI, and that's so far in the future. Let's worry about the stuff now: jobs, surveillance, AI and warfare. I have a long list of those. So there's the doomers on one side, and then the other, and this is where I'd put Marc Andreessen and much of Silicon Valley, much of those working on AI right now, Zoomers. Anything that gets in the way of AI is a crime against humanity, because AI could do so much good in medicine and science and education, et cetera, that any regulation, even trust and safety teams within the corporations themselves, the creators of these models, that's the enemy. Reid Hoffman, and I put myself here, is somewhere in the middle. I mean, he's closer to a Zoomer than a Doomer, and he calls him a Bloomer. And that's like, again, I put myself in this category. I see great potential in AI. I think if we're not stupid about it, and by the way, that's a big but, It could be a big net positive. There will be negatives, like with any new technologies, but I think this could be a real positive. But let's be smart about it. Let's be deliberate about it. Let's have guardrails in place. Let's really listen to trust and safety. One of the interesting things, so in 2022, when I started this, trust and safety was front and center. In fact, OpenAI was created in the mid-2010s because they were worried about Google only looking at the profit motive for AI. It's too important to leave it to the, for profit. And obviously that went by the wayside with OpenAI, but it went by the wayside with Google. Google in the late 2010s promised they would never let their AI used for surveillance or warfare. Started 2025, they dropped that. the trust and safety teams like, oh no, we're in a war against OpenAI. We're in a race, an arms race against OpenAI and the other makers of these LLMs. And so a lot of people were shifted from trust and safety to let's be.
Well, they went from don't be evil to be a little bit evil selectively here and there if necessary.
But don't you? I always thought it funny. I covered Google going public. I met the two founders when they were a 40-person company in like 2000. I always said, don't be evil. I thought that is the lowest bar in the world. Like, if there's a homeless guy in the street, don't punch him. I don't be evil. Like, yeah, okay, that's easy. How about like try to be good? I always thought that was kind of such a low bar, and they're even sometimes failing by that low bar.
It kind of is, but not from a perspective of. I don't even think it's malicious intent. But there is an ethos in Silicon Valley where you ship your product, and then if it has deleterious effects somewhere, you fix it after it happens. And that's how a lot of the really destructive things happen.
So, I mean, this in a way is my single biggest worry with AI. It's in the hands of too few people, and it's people who have proven that they're not very trustworthy. And so I do believe Google has the best intentions, but they also care more about winning this race. It's $1 trillion stakes. It's the future of the company. And I think they rationalize a lot in the name of that. In fact, another big worry about AI is, it's on a collision course with climate change. These data centers, they're unquenchable. They're just building more and more and more of it. It's really putting a huge strain on the electric grid. But so meanwhile, you have Google and Microsoft and Meta have these climate neutrality promises. So they're investing money in green energy and stuff. But that's just an accounting trick. It's like there's a fixed amount that's being produced at this point. And so they are really big because of their desire to win the AI wars. I think within the next year or two, consumer rates are going to go way up, and we're going to start to have brownouts and, kind of restrictions.
They are in some areas. There is demonstrable proof that rates are going up in areas. And it's interesting because, Elon Musk is, re-headquartering X in Texas, which already has a very fragile grid that's been largely privatized. And if their data centers are there, that seems like a recipe for disaster.
Right. It's starting to happen. I'm just saying, I think it's going to be widespread. It's interesting. I hadn't quite realized this before doing the research. Like the last couple of decades, electricity demand has been pretty flat. And so, prices might creep up because they have to upgrade equipment and all. But now, largely with AI, but, electric vehicles, whatever, a host of things, demand is spiking. We're slowly adding capacity. And, now Trump with his big ugly bill and other actions is taking away the financial incentives for wind, solar, battery, geothermal. And so it's making it where a lot of that stuff is being stopped at the exact same point where a lot of that stuff should be accelerating ahead.
There's a school of thought that says part of the problem is that when we think about AI and where the money is going, it's all going into large language models. And there are other types of AI that might be promising. Gary Marcus, who is a very, I would say, a skeptic, but also enthusiastic about AI, likes to argue that part of the problem is that we won't get to AGI until the models are really able to generalize in a broad way. And so he argues for a kind of model that's a neurosymbolic model, which ostensibly could be less of an energy suck than the LLMs that we are now all taking for granted are core de facto AI. Where do you see that going? Or are we so invested in LLMs now that's just the inevitable route that we're taking?
Well, some of the more interesting stuff coming out of Google in recent weeks is around image models, like either video or still images. So there's plenty of money being put into that. To me, where I really agree with Gary Marcus, and people a lot smarter than me about AI also agree, like machine learning, large language models brought us so far, but we really need another breakthrough or two before these things really can attain anything like artificial general intelligence. There's this idea that a machine, a model, could best humans at more or less everything brain-wise. And so, because you see the limits. I mean, the phrase I love, Professor Bender at the University of Washington, stochastic parrot. And that's just this idea, like, these things are amazing. They know a lot about everything. They have a PhD level knowledge on history and subspecialties of science across the board, but they don't understand a word.
Yeah.
They don't have common sense. They don't have reason. And, another big fear I have is autonomous AI. AI in charge of something. No. It's a tool. A human has to be in charge. We have the common sense. We have the idea. We have the goal. And this thing can help us get there. But I really fear with some of the rhetoric, and of course it's a cost saving for corporations. They always like that,
Yes.
that we're going to have autonomous AI when it could do really stupid things, even though it's in quotes smart.
My favorite recent example of this is I was looking for foods that are high in potassium. And so I just Googled how much potassium does a banana have? And the AI response gave me a number, but also said, this is X% of the daily value. Therefore, you should eat 14 bananas a day. And that was the kind of reasoning that you get. It's entertaining until you realize how many companies want to incorporate AI for actual decision making, especially when they believe that they can replace very high cost humans.
Exactly. Now we're getting to another fear, jobs. I think it's much more of a slow roll than people think. Like corporations want to save money, but corporations are conservative. They're testing, they're piloting. Let someone else do it because it's expensive right now. So I think it's going to be 5, 10 years, maybe 15 years before this really kind of infiltrates every aspect of society, schools, business, social relationships. It's happening, but I think it's going to be a long time, but it is happening. So the marketing team of 20 in some big corporations is going to be a marketing team of 15 or 10 or 8, because you could use AI as sort of your junior member of your team. Like, give me 15 illustrations of this idea. Give me 100 ideas. And so I think AI really is coming for the job. It will create new opportunities, new job categories, just like the internet, just like every technology. But I think it's going to eliminate far more jobs than it creates.
So how do you use AI in your everyday life?
Well, the first thing I did when I got this idea for a book is write me a 5,000-word book proposal for a book about AI. And I learned 2 things. Like, it's much better read. It has a much better memory than I had. So they're like little insights or factoids, data points I could use. But the other thing is, like, it can't write for anything. It's very formulaic. Yeah. It flattens
a lot of cliches, a lot of...
if I made a living writing press releases, I'd be worried because that is formulaic. But it's worth, I don't know, GPT-9. Maybe eventually it's going to be able to write a novel that impresses us. But
can it write a joke? That's been my bar. Can it write a good joke that comes out of nothing? That's the...
Reid Hoffman would say yes. I've read the jokes that he thinks are good. I'd say not quite yet. It gets the idea of a joke, but so... That's my long-winded way of saying I don't use it for writing, but it's a really interesting research assistant. Oh, what about hallucinations? Well, I use the ones that footnote. Yeah. And so that's a really interesting quote. That's a really good data point. And then I go, oh, good. CNBC has an article. That person did in fact say that quote. So I need to verify. But then again, I've, hired interns in the past and they've made mistakes too. Sometimes I think we're unforgiving about AI, that the mistakes it makes, humans can say really stupid things too. Like 35 to 40,000 humans die every year in the US because of auto accidents. Yeah. There's rarely a headline about it, but if a self-driving car killed somebody, it would make a headline, that kind of idea. But so I use it for research. It's really good for like a sounding board. I've used it like I have to have a tough conversation with one of my brothers, let's play it out kind of thing. I used Pi. My son was facing a serious surgery. He's fine. It went great, but we were really worried about it. And I'll give Pi credit. It asked all the right things. It expressed concern. I don't know if it meant anything to me, but it did get me thinking about things that I might not otherwise have been thinking about. But the real way I use it, or maybe the most valuable way, it's a great editor. I'll tell it something's not working here. I need a transition. Give me 10 different transitions. And it's never like I cut and paste and say, use that. But it gives me a lot of good ideas, and it's good at spotting mistakes and you have an agreement, your verbs and nouns aren't agreeing here kind of thing. One other thing I didn't list, it's great at summarizing, which is there's a 20-page paper, oh my God, I don't have all afternoon, but can you summarize the key points here? And it's very useful, limited, but useful.
Yeah, that's kind of how I use it. I think of it as an administrative tool. So last week I needed to set up an LLC and some corporate stuff and said, give me a checklist from easiest to most difficult. And then another one that says the order of operations I should do this stuff. Because I would spend 8 hours down rabbit holes trying to figure it out and get it wrong. But I also think about what you just said. I think people are less forgiving with AI because they don't have any guarantee that it will learn any lessons from mistakes. Whereas with humans, We kind of assume that if you fuck up really badly, you're going to internalize it and do better next time. And we don't necessarily have any evidence that AI does that without explicit training.
Right, right. It's kind of deliberate that it's not learning from its mistakes. They train these models, but then they kind of freeze them in time. And so most nowadays are connected to the internet. So you could ask it about something that happened in yesterday's news, but the model itself, and I think this is a good thing. If it was just learning on its own, that's autonomous AI.
Yeah.
And that's where something bad can really happen. So that is one way that they're largely being conservative in their approach to that. But it also means, again, they're not human. In fact, my favorite construct for AI is alien intelligence. We've never had anything like this. Again, it knows so much about everything. In a way, no human being on the planet. In fact, it is artificial general intelligence at all. It has such a broad range of knowledge about everything. You can ask about contracts or creating an LLC, whatever. And it, has strong domain knowledge, but doesn't understand a thing. And I think we need to figure out how to use it. It sounds so authoritative. And when someone sounds so authoritative, like, oh, we'll just trust that entity, that person in the past. Now this AI, that's not the way to use it. It's like, again, I think it's this great tool for me, for you, for writers, but that doesn't mean, someone who's not a writer can then write what we write.
Yeah.
The human element is, in fact, right after ChatGPT came out, people were sharing like ways they used it. And one of my favorite examples is someone asked it, explain Marxist theory in the version of a Taylor Swift song lyrics. And it was brilliant. It was funny. It did such a great job of doing it. But it's the human who had this special idea. Like, it just did what the human conceived. Some people think like, oh no, what are filmmakers? Like, you can't say like, make me a Martin Scorsese film. You, the human, still have to have the plots, the characters, the twists, and all that. And I think that's the way to understand it. You could be faster, but it's still, as an artist, as a creator, as a thinker, as a boss, you're still the one in charge.
So why do you think people, when they think about what can I use AI for? What can I replace? They immediately go toward human creative things like writing or creating art. Why is that the first thing? It's probably the thing that AI is least capable of being helpful with.
I'll confess I've had that same idea. I wish I was a good drawer. I wish I was an artist. And, all you have to do is conceive the idea. And, one of these models can see it through. I'll steal a term from Reid Hoffman. It gives us superpowers. He's never been good at languages, but in his voice, he could deliver a speech, or it can deliver a speech in Italian and Chinese and, a multitude of languages. So I think we're all kind of amazed by this idea of a superpower to write, to create and stuff. I mean, no one really dreams like, wow, I hope this bot could help me do my spreadsheet, more quickly. I do think that is where it's going to be used, but I think that's where everyone's mind goes, because it'll make me good at writing and I've never been good at writing kind of idea.
Yeah, I think that's true. I used it a year or two ago. I have a tattoo of a seraphim. It's very abstract. And so I used the biblical description, dumped it into a generative model just to see what it would spit out. And it spit out so many just crazy things that I wouldn't have, visuals that my human brain could not have thought of. And so I sent a bunch of them to my tattoo artist and said, not asking you to copy this, but they all look a little demonic and creepy and I like it. And so he after looking at the generative stuff for inspiration or just an idea that would be wildly different than his preconceived notions about what this was supposed to look like, he came back with something that was incredible and did not look like any of the AI stuff, but it just took that one prompt to get him to think about it in a different way. And that's what I think of as the potential for it.
And this is perfect. Again, it's you, the human, had this idea, used this tool, shared it with another human who didn't copy it. I mean, none of them sound usable, but it helped him do something better, something that pleased you. I had an interesting experience just this past weekend. My 16-year-old son likes to draw, and Google has this thing they're promoting right now, like take it. They said for your 7-year-old, he's 16, but take a drawing your kid did and we will animate it. We'll turn it into a story just based on that one static picture. And like, we were just amazed because he had written this short story for English class last year about an artist who is so into his drawings that he melts into it and loses himself. And how is he ever going to get out of his drawing? And that was the story that Google's Gemini came up with. And like, it just like was spooky. Like, wow, I guess you're a great artist. That was in there. But, I mean, this is some of the alchemy. This is some of the miracle nature of it. Again, this whole argument, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Should we halt it? We can't. It's innovation. You can't stop the tides. It's coming. I just wish we'd stop having these more esoteric things. It's like, it is here. It's going to have a big impact on society, schooling, jobs, across the board, warfare, surveillance. Let's talk about it. Let's not debate whether we should pause this thing. It is here, ladies and gentlemen. Let's figure out what's the best approach. So it would be more of a positive than a negative. I guarantee you bad things will happen with AI, just like, the internet. Who thought like, social media, and that's going to, help to set us each at each other's throats because it just amps up outrage kind of thing. I mean, bad things happen, but we could debate whether television, the car, the internet are good things. And I think that's the kind of debate we will be having. But let's do what we can now to ensure it's more of a positive than a negative.
So what's your both optimistic case and your pessimistic case? And where do you put your PDOM, or your probability that we all just get destroyed by AI?
Yeah, so this idea of PDOM, that it's not zero, because that, I guess, is possible. An asteroid is going to hit Earth and destroy us all, And so it's not zero, but it's very, very low. These things aren't even close to able to do the kind of things we're scared of. They're really limited. So I covered the .com years, like mid-1990s, and the rise of the internet. And, a lot of similarities, the money being thrown at it, the hype. And of course, there was a big bust. And I kind of think more or less the same is going to happen here. I don't know if there's going to be a bust on the order of the .com bust, because that was a lot of publicly traded companies. These are private companies. But, the world is going to be disappointed. A bad thing or two is going to happen. And so then the question is, what's on the other side? Let's just use the internet, the .com years. Like, okay, a lot of great ideas were thrown out there. No, you can't get rich overnight. It's going to take a long time before we have the critical mass for social media and that kind of stuff, or, e-commerce. We had to figure out how do you pay for credit cards and, trust and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's what's going to happen with AI, that, it's going to be a 10 or 15 year trajectory here that, as people kind of struggle with it, as they improve it. Another pet peeve of mine is, I respect Gary Marcus. He's really interesting, but I feel like he's someone who embodies this, like, wait, look, it's making this stupid mistake. It's terrible. Like, okay, well, it's a young technology. They're improving it every year. There's a lot of smart folks, a lot of money being thrown at this, and it's going to get much better. Some people, Reid Hoffman, Mustafa Suleiman, said, the hallucination rate is going to go way, 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 way down. I don't know. Other people say that'll never be solved before. But like, again, this idea that we're unforgiving, like, it's a thing that's being created. It's like judging the internet based on 1997 website, like everything looks like Craigslist, kind of back then. You really couldn't do much with it, but okay, well, but now of course we see what you could do with it. I think that's going to be true with AI. I do fear that people are going to be too impressed with it. They're going to put it in charge of things. And I think that, in the short and medium term, I do not want autonomous AI on anything that matters. Long term, maybe we could argue, but I still think I don't want AI in charge.
I would agree with that. Well, thank you, Gary. This has been a great conversation, and we're pleased to have you.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
And that's it for Money Talks. Thank you to our wonderful guest, Gary Rivlin, for joining. And thanks to Jessamine and Molli of Seaplane Armada for producing. We'll be back on Saturday with our regular edition of Slate Money.
Slate Money is sponsored this week by Saks. Saks Fifth Avenue makes it easy to shop for your personal style this season. Fall is here, and there are so many new fall arrivals that you're going to want to wear again and again. There's a great new relaxed Prada blazer. There are Gucci loafers you can take from work to the weekend. It is incredibly easy to visit Saks.com and find new arrivals from your favorite designers. I kind of love the shirts from Comme des Garçons. I can't always afford them, but it is definitely always there on my inspo board. And once in a blue moon, I might even buy one. Saks makes shopping feel customized to you. They have in-store stylists. They have Saks.com showing you only what you like to shop. They will even let you know when arrivals from your favorite designers are in or when something you love is back in stock. So find inspiration for your personal style every day at Saks Fifth Avenue.
Slate Money is brought to you by Charles Schwab. Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news in Washington right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes, and trade, inflation concerns, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise or wherever you listen.